Hello. It's me again, and you're welcome. You're welcome to the Michael Harding podcast. I could just as easily say, you're welcome to my room, because I am here, in the room. I love being here. And I've just come into it. I was walking in the town. I come home. And home is where the heart is. And home is where my family is. But there's also a little bit of me that finds a home in solitude. Having a space like this, I'm very lucky. I'm lucky because I'm able to write in it. I'm lucky because I'm able to do podcasts from it. And I suppose if I wanted to be a writer, then it's no big deal that I would have a room. I remember one time I used to work in the shed. There was a coal shed. It was tiny. It was a tiny little coal shed. And I put in a ceiling, and I put in a door, and I put in a floor, all of wood. And I broke through the wall and made a little window. Or rather, I got a second hand window and put it in. And it was rough and windy, and there was no electricity in it, so in those days I used to use an electric typewriter. So I had an extension lead came from the back door, out the back door, and in under the door of the shed for the typewriter, and I could sit there and I could write. And that was one of the first rooms I had, and another room was the child's room, you'd call it. The child's room. It was a small house. There was a room where the baby slept. And I used to have a little tiny table in the corner of that room. And I would work there sometimes. And now I have a beautiful room. And I feel really grateful. I feel grateful for my family. And I also feel grateful for the times that I can be alone. I feel grateful for everything, to be honest with you, because I had a long year. This time last year I was coming out of hospital. I'd had an operation, went through the winter being very nervous, had another one in March, big operation. And I've been recovering since. And I'm not fully fixed, but I'm nearly there. So it's like I feel my life has come back to me, and I feel grateful. And there's a really difficult thing happens when you're grateful in your own life for things that went well. How do you deal with close friends who are really suffering? Because while I came out of hospital with a success story and I was healed, I have two friends at the moment who are seriously ill. It's impossible. It's part of the human story, the unevenness of lives. Although when I was in hospital, I thought I was the one who was to be pitied. But in general, I feel grateful. I think if you were really strong, you'd feel grateful for everything. You know, like you'd feel grateful even if there was something went wrong. The very fact that you were living, the very fact that you were experiencing life, you would feel grateful. And I was on the phone this morning to somebody who is also a friend of this third party who, who's really not well at all. And we were talking about him and saying how terrible it was. And then I was asking her how's she getting on, and she was asking me how I'm getting on. And at the end of the day, I said, well, something will take us out eventually. And I could hear a pause on the other end of the line, like she was a bit taken aback by that bleakness that, we're all going to suffer eventually. We're all going to have to let go of life. And that may seem bleak, but I think that's why we remember the dead in November. Everything we do about the dead is really about us. Because the dead are dead. But it's the way we're incorporating them into our lives. And if we're incorporating the dead into our lives, it means something to us. We're carrying death inside us because we feel it's healthy. To cherish our loved ones, to suppose that they have gone marked with the sign of faith, that they have been absorbed into heaven, God, is a beautiful way of having a lens into heaven. But it's also a way of holding on to death inside yourself, because it's always thinking about how they go before us. And where they go before us, we will go too. Going to funerals is a very, very powerful sharing of grief, physically touching, sharing grief. But it also is a way that we carry funerals inside our heart. And that's what makes us equal. That's what solves the conundrum of all of human life being very uneven. Mortality is the great leveller. And we carry it inside us. And the more we carry it, the more we feel grateful for being here now. We might take it for granted being here now if we thought, well, sure, what's the big deal? I'll always be here. But to know that this life, which is so precious, which is so unique, which is so extraordinary, the DNA in you and me is so beautiful, that we evolved from the womb to be the kind of beings we are, is so amazing. And then you think, it will be over, maybe sooner than you think, and certainly not at a moment that you can plan yourself. Well, that makes it really special. And that's a way that November is something we carry inside us. We carry it on the inside because it balances us. It doesn't fill us with despair. It fills us with an intense excitement about being alive. And it makes complete sense at this time of year. I walk the streets. I love to walk the streets, especially at this time of year, just about 4 o'clock. And it's not dark, but the sun is setting. It happened to be setting this evening. I was in Dunlow, and it just happened to be way out on the coast, slanting down and blowing its light beautifully across the waves in the bay towards the pier. And it was extraordinary. And then it goes dark, and I went up the town. It's a hill in that town. And it's good exercise for me because it's aerobic exercise. And I walk up the hill, and then I walk round the edges. There's a big walk that goes along the river. And I took that. And by the time I got to the end of that walk, I couldn't see the river. I could only hear it. And then I came full circle back to the town, back to the bottom of the town again, and I walked back up the hill again. This was the second time up the hill. Good aerobic exercise. And I went into the shop, the Coop, and I got a pint of milk and I got a bit of bread. That's all I need for this evening. And I retired. I retired to the solitude of this room. And it's dark. And if I put on a little small side lamp, it gives a little light in the room. I can see everything. But it's so cosy. And I'll tell you what I have too. I have an electric fire. I'm trying to stay away from fossil fuels. So I burn less coal and I have less stoves. But what I did was I got one of these fairly cheap electric fires that blow the heat out, and it has a visual and it has little coals. Now, you'd need to be very innocent or very young to suppose it was a fire. But it gives the kind of the template of a fire. The little flickering flame and the coal. It gives you the template of it. And I bought it. I wasn't going to invest in a big expensive one, but I bought a cheap one, wondering, will this work? You know, would you be cozy sitting beside it? And I have to say, and I'm amazed, even though it's quite a cheap item, it satisfies me completely as a fire. You turn it on, you turn the light on, and then you light a little candle in the corner, maybe, in front of an icon, and the room is alive. And, you know, if you don't have a room like this, all I can say is that it's a great thing to have some little corner, or just even a corner of a room, but some space where you can be quiet. It gives me great consolation. As I say, for me, I'm a writer. I went full-time writing when I was 32 years of age. And that's 38 years ago, 37 years ago. So you'd expect, like, if I didn't have a room to write in at this stage, you'd be saying to me, maybe you should have done something else with your life. But I'm grateful. And I'm grateful for health. And those two things are underpinned by the darkness of November, the darkness of winter, and the fact that I carry with me the dead in my heart or inside. I cherish the memory of my mother, my father, of dear friends, really dear friends, people that I never expected that they would die early, people I was at school with or college with. And I never imagined that they would be the ones to have a sudden death. And some people who suffered in death. And some people who I didn't get on with and then had arguments with or said negative things about them and never resolved it. And that's something I feel bad about it, but that doesn't matter. I don't feel neurotically bad about it. But I feel that it's important to say it. You know, it's important to share the places that I have failed people. Well, there'd be a good few, and there'd be a good few in your life because we're human. And we do this to each other. We hurt each other. And again, there's nothing better than death to focus people on the fact that it's much easier and more important to forgive than to hold on to a wound. You know, if you hold on to your anger or you hold on to a wound, you just bring it to the grave with you. It has no meaning. The only person it hurts is you. Poison. You're drinking poison when you hold on to an anger or a wound or a... Anger is the only poison. What is it they say? You drink yourself and expect it to kill your enemy. So November and death is also like something that underpins forgiveness. Just like it underpins gratitude for life, you know, being grateful for life, because it's so precious and because it'll be over so soon. It's also like it underpins forgiveness because it'll be over so soon. Death is the great leveler. Why would I hold a grudge? Why? More than just saying, well, I don't hold a grudge or I don't feel negative about that person, but I know that we'll say maybe somebody passes away that I had argued with at a deep level and I never went back to say to their face, I'm sorry. There's a huge liberation. Whenever I've done it, and it hasn't been very often, but I mean it is a great liberating thing to do. When you say you're sorry. I'm sorry. And there's a bit of me that I'd never apologise for anything. You know, I would have this sort of, I was going to say male inability to reverse. I think it is a bit of a male thing, isn't it? A kind of masculine thing where you can't reverse. The classic example is, I know I'd be driving the car and, you know, this was before there were sat-navs. And the lady wife might be sitting in the car and she'd have a map. And she'd say, will we look at the map? And I'd say, no, I know where Ballina is. Like, don't be telling me that I need a map to get to Ballina. And somewhere beyond Sligo, it'd be clear that I'd gone the wrong way. And the lady wife would be thinking, do you want to look at the map? And I'd be like, we'll go on this way. Because you can't reverse, you can't give in, you can't admit you were wrong. That's something that comes in the DNA, doesn't it? But at a deeper level, you know, really at a deep level, I was wrong. Or I'm sorry. Or I'm sorry I said that hurtful thing. I mean, in all the in all the kind of self-help or, wellness podcasts or therapy sessions you go to or whatever, in all the whole gambit of what is said nowadays in modernity, is there enough said about being sorry? Is there enough said about forgiveness, which is the other side of that? One is going to say, I'm sorry. But the other is forgiveness. And again, at a surface level, like, I can get angry sometimes over, let's say, political things. I'm so defensive about my own culture. I see Ireland as a very small little place, a tiny culture of, 5 or 6 million people. You'd fit us into the backside of Manchester. Greater Manchester is bigger. And because we have this issue with colonialism, I'm always defensive about, things that are Irish being as good as things that are British or American or English. And it's a small-mindedness on my part. There's no doubt about that. I mean, like, sometimes it might be factually accurate or something. But there's no need to be personal about it. There's no need, supposing I'm listening to a lecture and the lecture refers to the Irish in some sort of colonial way. And I'm getting emotionally annoyed about it watching the telly. And there's no need to be. I'll give you an example of it. There was something happened recently, and I was watching a program on Netflix. It's called Black Earth Rising, and it's a brilliant drama, and it's about Rwanda, and it's complicated, and if you don't know it, I won't go into it. But there was one character in it who comes from Belfast, I think Belfast, and she's the sister of the main character who has died, and the main character who has died hadn't been in touch with her for years and hadn't told her daughter that she had this sister, and so on and so forth. And they're tossing the ashes into the Thames, and the Irish woman, let's call her, is talking to the daughter, the adopted daughter of her sister. And she's bitter because she hasn't spoken to her sister for many, many years since her sister had an abortion. And this adopted daughter that she's talking to is black, and she makes it clear to her that she would never be welcome as part of their family because blood is blood, she says. And later, another main character gives us more information about her and says, in fact, she had so many guns under the bed helping the IRA during the Troubles that's why the sister never visited Belfast. So here was a cameo picture of somebody Irish and Catholic. You couldn't imagine a more twisted Catholic. You couldn't imagine a more sour, sick and poisonous manifestation of Catholicism in all its sectarian bitterness, and double lapped, to make a big sandwich of it, double lapped with this notion of being an IRA supporter as well. And I watched it and I thought, now that's only like a 3-minute sequence in the whole big Netflix series. So why do they have to always pick such a twistedly negative image of Ireland and of Catholicism? And I got so cross with the television that I turned it off. I couldn't enjoy the rest of the programme. Now, 24 hours later, I started laughing. I started laughing at myself, thinking, is it possible that the great wise man that I am, and I could be so small-minded as to get annoyed with the television? Because, in my opinion, they weren't given a fair representation of my culture. Now, like, that is really defensive. You know, when you're getting annoyed with stereotypes on the television and you feel threatened by them, well, it's because you're threatened inside yourself. So I had to say to myself, to be honest, do I feel insecure as a Catholic? And of course I do. Do I feel uneasy belonging, or even saying in these podcasts that I belong in a spiritual way to the Catholic tradition? Yeah, that's what's going on. I'm feeling insecure. And do I feel insecure when I get annoyed or when I get defensive about Irish culture? Yeah. Because it's common sense to acknowledge that there are levels of high culture, there's levels of high sophistication, levels of educational, institutional achievement in mainland Britain that we just don't have in Ireland. We don't have anywhere as big as Oxford. We don't have the levels of scientific and, you know, social scientific inquiry that goes on in great British institutions. We don't have the power economically that Britain has. We're not lesser because we're smaller. But it's funny the way I think we can use cultural identity and get defensive about cultural identity and get almost, you know, political about it. Because unconsciously we're just projecting our own insecurities. Maybe I feel insecure about my own intellectual ability. Maybe I feel insecure because I love Catholicism so much, and yet I'm uneasy about institutions. So that's the way that I think November works for me, is finding the liberation to say you're sorry, but also to ask forgiveness. And those two things happen because we carry death inside us in November. We cherish our loved ones who have passed away. And in this lovely little room of mine, as I said before I began, I lit a candle in front of an icon. This icon is only a piece of wood, and yet this icon is an embodiment of some form. And that form then is a lens between me and the other world, let's say. November is Samhain. November is a time to meditate on the other world. What is the other world? Well, maybe the best way to think about the other world is to think about this world. Let me give you an example. In this world, we'll say in Buddhist terms, they talk about samsara. Samsara is like the surface of everything, the manifestation, the incarnation of all karma. So the world is samsara, and enlightenment is a kind of process of developing detachment from samsara. In Christian terms, I think one of the ways that it comes up is the distinction between flesh and spirit. To live in the flesh or to live in the spirit. And sometimes that gets mistranslated, particularly in the context of the Victorian culture that we all came through. It gets mistranslated in the word flesh. The flesh. Renounce the flesh. We immediately think of, young, beautiful bodily flesh of the opposite sex, let's say, or flesh that we have a desire for, the longing erotically for the flesh. But the flesh means something bigger. The flesh means all that surfaces in the world like flesh, like in the sensate world, as opposed to that which is in the spirit, in the soma. On the inside, that's the distinction I make. Samsara, or the flesh, is like what I'd call living on the outside, living on the surface, as opposed to living on the inside. As opposed to having in your heart a room, having in your heart a place where you can go and be alone on the inside, and there speak to the mentor deity. To know that in that room, inside, in the very center of your heart, you're in the presence of the motherliness of God. Held. And the belief in that's something that it just counterpoints death. It counterpoints it. You of course it's not literally true. It has the power of a poem. But think about this. Which is more true? That which is literally true, or that which is poetically true? We make the mistake sometimes of thinking about literal truth as a kind of a yardstick of absolute truth. Is it literally true? And if it's not, it's like, okay, it's not true. But literal truth and poetic truth are two different levels of grasping, of realizing the nature of things. And sometimes the poetic truth is the more powerfully real, the more truthful. So when it comes to a sense of death, I say that we carry death inside us. It's like we carry November inside us. But it's also like the ritual. Let's say when I come into this room, I light a candle in front of an icon, and in some way, now I have another light on, it's a little lamp. Soft light in the room. Gorgeous warm light and a flickering fire. A mechanical flickering fire. As good as any fire. The whole room is soft and warm, but because it's softly lit, the candle has a powerful visual presence in the corner of the room, and it lights up the icon. And there's something powerfully true about that. There's something is like death, is the darkness, and yet we have this light. There's something inside in us that is like a light in the darkness at the very centre. We don't have to force ourselves to believe in heaven, I think. We don't have to force ourselves to believe in God. It's almost like instinctive. You know, if you strip away all the distractions, all the samsara, if you come away from the outside, if you come away from the surface, if you come into the silence of the room, you don't actually have to believe in God. Existentially, you're in the space where you are God. You are God in that very center point. And that seems to be the core experience of transformation in my life. I get little tiny moments like that. But they're the transformative moments. And November is, for me, a beautiful, beautiful time to feel myself into that space, into that solitude, to walk in the evening light, watch the evening light dying in the sky earlier every evening is one of the most remarkable things you could do. Pay attention to it. Even if it's only knowing the time on your clock and going outside onto the street or looking out a window or going out onto the road or going for a walk and feel the darkness encroaching. Feel it as beautiful. Feel it as extraordinarily magical and wonderful. This dark curtain that comes across the earth when the sun goes away. Be there for that transition. And you'll feel it in some way. It's externalizing what's inside you. It's externalizing mortality. It's externalizing aging. And it is exquisitely beautiful. And if you notice a leaf falling at the same time, if you notice leaves on the ground, you begin to experience the shortness of life as beautiful. And you begin to feel that sense of a little room inside yourself. Number one, a room that is a counterpoint. I can't go any further with that, you know. Because it's like you find this yourself. You find this yourself in your own room when you go into that space inside in your heart. When you have taken the cloak of evening, the beautiful mantle of night, and you have wrapped yourself in it. You have put it all around you. And you find that inside you are there at the center of it, like a candle in the darkness. A flame that will never die. And it's like you wonder what that flame is. And I can't put a name on that for you. I can't say what poetic word you might use in whatever religious tradition you're living in. There's different words for it. But it's the same experience. It's the sense of being here now, and of knowing that when you experience the here and now at that level of solitude, you're not alone, and you will never die. This is eternity. Thank you for being here in this little room of mine in the middle of November. Thank you and bye-bye.